Hello and welcome. My name is Lorraine and I am a Shanachie or a storyteller. I'm a guide and also a Celtic druid, and I'm here to guide you on a virtual walk through some woodlands. Now, we can all give reasons why trees are so important to us as humans. We can point to the obvious: to help us fight climate change, to provide oxygen for the planet, to ensure a balanced ecosystem. But actually, it goes far deeper than that. Scientists are only now beginning to understand how important trees grouped together in our woodlands are to our general well-being and that of the planet. And even that trees might be slightly sentient. And our shared history goes far deeper than you might realise, particularly on this island. Humans have been around for almost 200,000 years, but only 10,000 years ago, right on the spot you were standing, was covered under a 2.5 mile deep sheet of ice. There were no people here, no vegetation, just a cold, barren ice sheet stretching for thousands of miles out across the Atlantic up into the north. As the centuries passed and the ice began to melt, bare ground became exposed and seeds took root. Centuries more passed, and by the time the earliest people found their way here, the place had become transformed into a temperate rainforest. A Celtic rainforest, the rarest of its kind. Oaks, alder, birch, unimaginably huge to us today, towered over the forest floor, which was thick with hazel, willow, and holly. Wild boar, wolves, and bears made their homes here long before we did. And what does that mean? It means that this island is incredibly fertile. The soil here is fresh and full of nutrients, even today. Now, I don't know if you're listening to me while you're walking in a woodlands or sitting under a single tree in your garden, but I want you to spend a minute or two conjuring up in your mind's eye a woodlands, like the one I'm in. You're surrounded with trees. Their barks all slightly different. The leaves, different too. There's a beech tree, her bark smooth and grey. There's a fir, craggy, with low hanging branches. There's a chestnut, its leaves open like a palm, waving hello. The floor of the forest is a multitude of colours. Ferns, brambles, bracken, rotting leaves, mushrooms, and fallen branches covered in moss. And the smell in the air is fresh. It's earthy, and you cannot help but breathe in deeply. Let's go back in time too. Imagine this place as a rainforest that for miles and miles around you there is nothing but trees. Patches of oaks merge with patches of birch. There are no paths, no clearings except small areas under certain trees. The bird song is louder and more noisy than you've ever heard before. And that caveman part of your brain is on alert. Your animal instincts are warning you that within the darkness of the trees lies danger. This is the setting of our island's oldest story. According to Irish mythology, far, far away, a long-lost land, there lived a woman called Kazar. Kazar heard of a coming flood. She and her tribe carved great boats out of the huge cedar trees that grew on the hills surrounding her valley home. They worked hard hollowing out the trunks of the trees, gathering food and other essential supplies. And together they set sail across the little of the world that they knew. They were searching for a new home. But the journey was hard and treacherous, and they faced many, many challenges. High waves, storms, hard currents, and creatures from the deep sea. From the hundreds that left, only 3 men and 49 women made it to the shores of this magical island. And where they landed is disputed to this day, but I believe it was where the 3 rivers meet, the Nore, the Suir and the Barrow, at the borders of modern-day Kilkenny, Waterford and Wexford. Here they found the land thick with vegetation, trees larger than they could behold, and they decided it was best to split into 3 groups, in order that one of them might make it through this wild rainforest and find a natural clearing where they could settle. One group went west, led by a man called Bith. The other group, led by a man called Laura, went east, and the other group, led by Kazar and her husband Fintan, remained where they landed. Bith and his followers didn't last long. Bith was older than most of the group, and God love me, died of exhaustion trying to forge a path through the trees. And the women, they returned to Khazar and Finton. It wasn't too much longer that Laura passed too. Unable to clear the land and create a proper settlement, and unable to keep up with the demands of his 15 new wives, he too succumbed to exhaustion. They buried him where they had camped, on the coast, near Wexford, and actually not far from the woods I'm talking to you from here in Courtown. The ancient grave is still there today. So Finton was now the only remaining man on the island, and did the only sensible thing he could do. He turned himself into a salmon and swam away from the women. Poor Khazar, she died of a broken heart. And one by one the other women followed, until there was only one woman remaining. Her name was Bamba. And she only survived because she grew as wild as the island itself, eventually becoming part of the land. And it is she who gave this island its first name, Bamba. Now Finton spent the next few centuries as a salmon. Then, turning into a hawk, he saw new settlers arrive and fail to conquer the wildness of the land. The centuries passed again, and he turned into a great stag and witnessed more waves of settlers, and the last brought with them new tools made of iron. These men and women were here to stay, and so he returned to his original form and settled with them, passing on the stories of the people he had witnessed coming and leaving. Among them, the Firbolg, the Numidians, the Partholians and the Fomorians, these ancient tribes of Ireland. And so, from a story reputed to be 5,000 years old, told and retold and retold and retold over 5,000 years of fireside story sittings, we can learn two important lessons. The first is the need for balance. The second, a respect for the natural world. Now, as we stand here on the edge of the woods, I want you to remember that this is where we as a species belong, at the edge of the forest. Trees provided us with tools, heat, weapons, shelter, food and medicine. Everything we needed could be found under the thick green canopy. But our ancestors understood the exchange. They understood and respected that we shared the land, that we shared the bounty the trees provided, and each tree provided its own gifts. Little is left of the Celtic rainforest now. A few acres in Wales, and a few acres more on the Beara Peninsula in Cork. So what happened to it? We did. Over the centuries, it has been chopped down to build ships, to make room for agriculture, to create housing and fuel, slowly being replaced by fields, and then later in time, the Quilcha commercial forests. And as our forests grew smaller, our connection to the trees did too. And when they disappeared, our connection disappeared. But it's time now to relearn what our ancestors knew. So let us set out into the woods and look at the first tree we find on our path. It's the father of the forest, the oak. In 2020, the year of COVID, you should know of the old Irish folklore that tells us that to catch a falling oak leaf will keep you safe from catching a flu that winter. But in case you don't catch a leaf, an oak wood fire will burn away coals and flue from the house. I see it in front of you. See it in your mind's eye if you need. Tall and proud, the trunk is straight. The bark has deep fissures and ridges, giving it an almost scaly look. The older the tree grows, the more bulbous the bottom of the trunk becomes. The leaves will have lobes or knots coming out from the central stem. And this year, well, you'll find many acorns. The oak has always held a special place in the forest, and oak forests were once the most common of all, and we can see this in our place names. The old Irish for oak was dure, as in Quildure, Kildare, the oak wood, nor Dura, Derry, just oak grove. Or what about Adair, Ondure, the oak? There's many more too. In ancient Ireland, dating from the Bronze Age right up to the 8th century, we used a sophisticated law system called the Breton Laws. These covered everything from property to marriage, rules of warfare and festivals even. They also ensured that our woodlands were respected and looked after. And oaks are listed amongst the Breton Law tracts along with a number of other trees. The Arig Fado were the most important. These were known as the nobles of the wood, or the chieftain trees. There was the oak along with the ash, the yew, the hazel, the holly, Scots pine and crabapple. To kill or harm one meant that you would need to pay an honour price equal to that of the chief. The standard was 2 prime milk cows and a 3-year-old heifer. Now, the average person might only hold a small herd, and so the loss could mean starvation potentially over the winter. And so while we might laugh at the idea of being fined a couple of cows, that's about €8,000 in today's money, so it's a hefty enough fine. So why were these trees so important to be given the same status as a chief? Well, let's look at the oak. What did it mean to our ancestors? Firstly, the wood is extremely strong, making it great for building. Defensive walls on ring forts, as well as maybe the buildings themselves. Furniture, storage barrels, boats, anything that needs to be strong. The bark was used to tan leather and to dye wool, and later on silks. The bark and the leaves mixed together and boiled down into a tonic was used as an antiseptic to clean wounds, to ease rashes and to heal burns. Everybody cooked off the fire back then, so burns were common. In hard winters, acorns too could be ground down into a flour for bread. The Vikings too adored oak, as it made, they felt, the finest wood for shipbuilding. Boats were built to last, and Vikings knew that a good boat could literally be the difference between life and death. I often wonder of the Viking graves, those chieftains buried in their beloved boats. How many of those boats might have been built with Irish oak? Now, the oak, well, it's considered old, 300 years. And our Celtic pagan ancestors held the oak tree up as a tree possessing its own magic. Oaks are often struck by lightning, but the tree continues to grow. And in Britain, Druids believed that when the tree was struck by lightning, that's when the magical and sacred plant mistletoe grew on it. It had been placed there by the lightning, and it was perfect for spells. The first doors were made of oak, as it was believed no evil could pass through them. Some think that this is perhaps where the word door actually came from. Door, door. It's possible. And speaking of the word evolution, the Druids, as guardians of the oaks, or dree in the old word, came from the oak too. Dree, dur. It's again possible. The Breton Laws, which kept from the Bronze Age right up to the 8th century, the trees and the oak in high stature, eventually faded away, and the financial value of the tree won out, and more were chopped down and sold. It's a common misconception that this happened during the Tudor time, but actually we cut down most of them ourselves. By the time the Tudor period rolled round, there was only between 4 and 12% of these ancient forests left. And fair enough. After the English conquered Ireland, the trees became the property of the Crown, and the remaining 4 to 12% did disappear. Elizabeth I demanded that all forests be chopped down to prevent Irish rebels from hiding within them. She had to fight the Spanish Armada, so needed many boats, and Henry VIII built a Tudor navy to send ships to explore the New World, the Americas. It wasn't until the 1830s that iron slowly began to replace wood for ships. But this wonderful tree, the oak, despite all the things it's seen, is still one of the most recognisable trees on the Irish landscape. Each tree supporting over 280 insects, along with up to 10 different bird species using it to nest or feed in. And don't forget the squirrels, the badgers, the mice and the deer that feed off the acorns. Though a tree won't begin producing acorns till it's 70 or 80 years old, and even then only every couple of years. But nothing else makes the tree all the more special. As we walked down through the woods, We'll stop at the next tree. It's another Arig Fado, another sacred tree, another one that is as equal to a chief. But did you know that there were 5 particularly special trees believed to protect Ireland? Each province had a special Baile tree or sacred tree. There was an oak, 3 ash trees and a yew. Under these massive old sacred Baile trees, this was where the tribes would gather. They might hold inaugurations, peace talks, or swear oaths. Here in Leinster we had a yew. It grew in Carlow, near Loughlinstown. It's long gone now, and a small cathedral sits on the site. That it was replaced by a church is no coincidence, particularly when it comes to the yew tree, because that is the tree we're looking at next. You see, since ancient times, the yew tree was held as a sacred, religious tree, connected with wisdom and rebirth. It represented resurrection long before Christianity came to these shores. If it's not in front of you, see it in your mind's eye. The bark twists. It's sinewy, almost like a muscular limb twisting in a reddy brown colour. Long strips of bark kind of peel away from time to time, and the older it gets, you might discover that the centre of it is hollow. The leaves are deep dark green needles which grow in rows of 2 by 2 by 2 along thin branches. If you rub these leaves, these needles, and smell your hands, they won't smell like pine. It smells of nothing really. The female tree has red berries and the male small cones. And here's the thing. Here's its connection to resurrection. It is known across Europe as the death tree, as almost every single part of it is poisonous. Even the sawdust is toxic. And yet, if you find a large yew, it will be hundreds of years old at that point. The oldest tree in Britain or Ireland is a yew. In Perthshire, Scotland, there grows a yew that is thought to be somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 years old. Perhaps this is why they were thought by our ancestors to be immortal, as a yew tree can grow as old as 9,500 years. Fintan, when he was finished playing around in the river as a salmon, or flying as a hawk, or doing whatever it is that stags do, and returned to the humans, he declared his great age proven by outliving a yew tree. Now here in this woods, the tree has been uprooted by a storm and now sits across the path. The branch driven into the boggy ground by the weight of the tree when it fell, and it has rerouted the tree. And so it grows, new branches now growing at strange angles from the lateral trunk, the former roots now sprouting needles. I tell you, it takes more than a felling by a storm to kill a yew. One of the oldest surviving man-made objects is a poisonous arrow tip made of yew. It dates back over 150,000 years. And when Ireland was conquered by Anglo-Norman King Henry II in the 1100s, well, those Norman knights carried with them longbows made of yew. But aside from weapons, yew is incredibly strong and has been used for many things. It was often chosen, due to its strange patterning and unique colouring, for special furniture like chests, seats of honour, thrones even, altars. And today you'll find quite a lot of bedboards and coffee tables because of that unique patterning. But it's heavy and dense, which makes it unsuitable for other things. You wouldn't want to be getting into a boat made of yew. Now look at the floor of the forest beneath the yew, and you will see nothing grows here, due to the poisonous nature of the trees. And so yews naturally created special forest clearings. Again, ideal for oath swearing, meetings between tribes, even druidic rituals. And some of the towns and counties that bear the memory of the yew include Terranure. The Nure is Irish for yew. Tirnanure, the land of the yew. Mayo, Mainayure, the plain of the yew. Or Nuri, Onure, the yew. But the fact it was held as sacred and special and magical in its own way. Perhaps this is why, when the first churches were built, that they used these sacred meeting places, as the worship of the old gods of nature were left behind and Christianity became part of our culture. And that's something you'll still find today. Many older churchyards and cemeteries are surrounded by yew trees, here and across the UK. I can guarantee it, keep an eye out. And so the death tree, it still holds a place in our culture. In the future, it might become more important again, as the poison, Taxol, that runs through this tree can actually cure cancer. However, you would currently need 200-year-old trees to make a single dose, so we're still some time off. But because of the spiritual aspects of the yew, it's worth taking a moment to ask us, what lesson does the yew hold for us? So think about its ancient age and all of the human history it has outlived. Think of it as a symbol for all the wisdom that could be collected over all that time. It is said that the yew carries the lessons of all the trees, and it is also said that we too carry all the wisdom and learning and understanding of our ancestors. And so the yew reminds us of possibility. It emphasizes the relatively brief span of human life, the short-term nature of our beliefs and practices, which often seem inadequate over time. And as the fallen yew adapts and continues living, it reminds us that we too must adapt to continue growing, not cling to old beliefs which no longer serve us. And that change, while it may be uncomfortable at first, will in time become normal. Challenge can become power. As we are walking through the trees, you might notice a mushroom here and there, growing out the side of a fallen tree, or popping up from the leafy ground. There's something magical about the fungi, and I'm not talking about fairies. You see, scientists and researchers have discovered something that foresters have long suspected. They have discovered that beneath every forest and wood, there is a complex underground web of roots, fungi, and bacteria helping to connect the trees and plants to each other. This subterranean social network is nearly 500 million years old, and has become known as the Wood Wide Web. Because when we say connecting with each other, what we really mean is speaking to each other, communicating, and this is how it works. Trees absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere around them and light from the sun, and through this process they create sugar, or sap, to feed themselves. A byproduct of this process is oxygen, but you knew this already. The sugar made by the tree contains all the nutrients the tree needs to survive. And so roughly 30% of those sugars are sent down into the tree's roots and out onto the underground web of connected roots and fungi. A sort of payment, feeding the fungi so that the tree can speak to other trees. If a tree needs something, perhaps a little bit more nitrogen, carbon, even water, it simply asks the network if anyone has anything to spare, and it's shared by the other trees. The network can be used for other information too. A study in Africa showed that a tree which was being eaten by giraffes told the other trees what it was planning on doing. There's giraffes eating leaves from my branches. I'm sending toxins into them to make them taste nasty. You guys should too. For 100 meters either side of the trees, all the leaves were full of toxins. A strange insect has landed on me and is eating my bark. Here is a chemical breakdown of its saliva. Anyone know what it is? And a tree might answer, why yes, send this particular vibration out to attract its natural predator. It's incredible. What's even more incredible is that this system of sharing can keep the stumps of chopped down trees alive for hundreds of years, which scientists believe that might suggest a connection, a love, a relationship perhaps between certain trees. The trees can share warnings about incoming swarms of insects. They can share warnings about upcoming droughts, water shortages. And why scientists think that maybe trees might have more of an affection for particular trees over others is that trees can recognize and prioritize their own children. Trees recognize which trees came from their own seeds, and these parent trees make sure that their babies are well looked after, receiving all the nutrients they need to grow big and strong. A little sadder perhaps is that when a tree comes to the end of its life or suspects it is to be felled, it sends all of its sugars, nutrients and memories out onto the web to be absorbed by the forest. That's right, I said memories. Scientists have now discovered that trees have a memory. They can remember droughts and the conditions that led up to them. And so if a tree suspects a drought is on its way, it will not only store extra water, but may decide to bud a little early or a little later to ensure maximum seeding. So with that in mind, let's head deeper into the woods and explore the next tree on our path, the ash. 3 of these sacred Baila trees were ash. And when the Vikings reached our shores and established towns of Dublin, Wicklow, Weisfjord and Wasserfjord, they too held the ash as sacred, believing that the world sat inside a great cosmic tree called Igdrassel. Whether it was an ash or a yew is still up for debate. But when you see trees or tattoos depicting the tree of life, it's the Igdrassel tree. Growing tall and straight, the ash tree, like the oak, has much to give. See it in your mind's eye. You can see it when it's young and the bark is smooth, or as it ages, the bark splits into a diamond-like pattern. The leaves grow in groups, a long stem with 5 to 11 leaflets growing from it. In rural Ireland, bored children were often sent to find an ash with an even number of leaves. A little like a 4-leaf clover, it's an extremely rare discovery. Ash is home to over 250 species of insects, and their distinctive key seeds in spring look a little like nests sitting in the trees. But they're eaten by a multitude of birds, from fluffy great owls to tiny bullfinches. Like the oak, the wood is strong, but it's much more pliable, making it ideal for the use in carts and wheels. Even in England, the Morgan Car Company uses it in their car frames still. But of course, here in Ireland, it's all about the clash of the ash. Irish hurls are made using ash as it doesn't splinter when it's hit. Now, you might not be a fan of modern-day GAA or hurling, but even if you're not, you must appreciate that hurling is the oldest field game in the world. It's been played in Ireland for 3,000 years, which is quite amazing when you think about it. And in all that time, hurls have been made with ash. One of the most popular myths that I tell is a long one. I'm not going to tell it here today, but it is the tale of Cuchulainn, the Hound of Cullen, and how he earned that name by killing a prize hound with his hurl and slither. But what else of the ash in Ireland? 2 of the oldest festivals in the world are Samhain and Bealtaine, evolved today to Halloween and the Maybank holiday, or the start of the summer season. In centuries past, huge bonfires were burnt on these dates, made up of sacred woods, the ash being the most important. On the hill of Usnach in Westmeath, a bonfire the size of a modern-day 4-bedroom house was lit, a beacon to welcome the return of the sun after a long winter. The smoke from the ash was thought to ward off illness, and herds of cattle were pushed through the billowing smoke. Smaller fires were raked out so that people could jump over them, to ensure they would stay safe from illness. Of course, there are many stories of teenage boys making these fires a little bit too high in order to show off how brave and strong they were. You wouldn't want to get burnt between the legs. And the following morning, after everything was drunk and all the songs were sung and all the rest, the ashes were collected and spread onto the fields to encourage growth. It was at Bealtaine that both trade and indeed warfare resumed after the winter. And ash was important too for this, as the long straight ash that doesn't splinter and moves with the warrior makes for the best spears and the best arrow shafts, perhaps fitted with a poisonous yew tip. In this case, it is good to know too that the inside of the bark of an ash tree is a natural antiseptic, and on the morning of battle, the druids would enter the forests and strip peels of bark to tend to the injured later on in the day. And the messengers travelling between territories would pack their shoes with ash leaves, as they were thought to ease sore and tired feet. Ash was also thought to have magical power over water. And in the 1840s, when so many millions fled on Gorta Moor, or the Great Hunger, the Irish potato famine, making new lives in America and Canada, it is so sad to think that many of them brought with them strips of ash bark sewn into their clothing to ensure that they survived the journey. Now, the 5 great Baila trees. There was the oak at the mouth of the River Shannon, and there was our yew here in Carlow, And 3 ash trees that marked the boundaries surrounding Meath, the largest at Usnach, are all long gone. And depending on which storyteller you listen to, they were either cut down by the last Druids to protect them from the encroaching Christians, or burnt down by the Christians as a sign of victory to the last remaining Druids. But the humble ash is still with us. And it's one of the most common trees you'll find growing in the hedgerows of Ireland. There are many places that remember the great ashes that once grew there, like Ashford in County Wicklow, Athna Finchog, or Ashfield in Dublin, Gortna Finchog, the Irish for ash. Now let's explore deeper into the forest and move to the next ranking of the trees between the Breton Laws, the Focla Fido, or the lower divisions. Still important, but in this case the fine is a single prime milk cow and her calf. Still quite a blow to the family to lose that much potential food for the sake of some stolen or damaged wood. And it's here where we find the elder tree. Now, how many of you have enjoyed an elderflower cordial on a hot summer's day? And the elder is an interesting tree. It's a funny tree. See it in your mind's eye. Long, spindly branches that grow out of the earth. The tree can look more like a shrub or a bush, but it can grow tall when given the opportunity. Like the ash, the leaves grow out of long stems with 5 or 7 leaflets, and in the summer months it blooms for long periods with sweetly scented white flowers that turn to berries come the autumn. If you smell the bark, though, and the leaves, it isn't pleasant. And so a tree with nicely scented and pretty flowers, and yet an ugly scented bark and leaves, well, it drew suspicion. So it isn't really that surprising that it had connotations with witchcraft. It is said that the best wands are made out of elder, and that fairies made their pipes using elder wood, and their tree's natural magic aided to the fairies to woo foolish humans away to the land of the Sidhe. Elder is known as the mother tree, or the lady's tree, and considering in all mythology to have a female spirit, and so it's unlucky to burn, as the witches might come to avenge the tree. As this old rhyme tells us, elder is the lady's tree, burn it not, or cursed you'll be. But despite the fact that it had all these connotations, the flowers and the berries were an important asset to our ancestors' diets. The leaves, as gross tasting as they are, can be made into an effective remedy for earache. Boiling the flowers and the leaves together, maybe with a dash of honey, into a tea helps ease a sore throat and a tickly cough. Plus, they're packed with vitamin C to help you recover faster. The berries can be made into wine, something we Celts are very fond of. From the earliest days we were importing wine from mainland Europe. And it's always nice to have a little home brew, though. But you have to be careful. If the berries aren't fresh, the wine might look and taste the same. But even a hint of mould on those berries, it'll make you hallucinate. Between this and magic mushrooms, it's no wonder we have some very strange mythology. It is said that the summer doesn't really start till the elder's in full bloom, and that it ends when the berries are ripe. But it's in November that the tree's magic is supposed to be really strong. Celts believe the year was split into 2 halves, marked as Samhain and Bealtaine, and during the transitional period, Halloween and the Maybank holiday today, we were subject to the threats of a thin time, a time when the Sidhe, or the spirits of the land, and those who have come before us and have died, could return. The earth was seen as a mother goddess, the sun a father god. But the sun is dead and cannot protect you in the dark half of the year, and the mother is asleep. And so our Druidic pagan ancestors used the sap of the elder to create a special tincture, which they wiped their eyes in, which enabled them to see the dead and the Sidhe, and so protect the tribe. There was a large elder forest just a 3-hour walk from the hill of Tara, the seat of the High Kings of ancient Ireland, and today it's called Trim after the Old Irish for elder, Throm. Another of the Focla Fido is the Blackthorne, as it too grows more like a bush, very similar to hawthorn, but the bark is much darker, hence its name, and its leaves are the typical oval leaf shape ending in a point, while hawthorn leaves look a little bit more like ivy leaves, but with a jaggedy pattern around the edges. But the real key identifiers are the long thorns, almost 2 inches long. In summer it blooms pretty white flowers, and you'll see many of them in the hedgerows of Ireland. And in autumn, the blue-grey slowberries cover the trees. The blackthorn has long been associated with the fairies and still does. Some of you will have heard stories of, as a child, of blackthorns being pulled up or damaged by farmers, and the next day, Asher, the poor man, was found dead in his bed. But even in modern times, the trees are still held up as fairy trees, not to be touched. As recent as 1999, a €100 million planned motorway was rerouted after a local campaign to save the blackthorn, said to belong to the fairies. It was feared that should the tree be pulled up, that the fairies would seek their revenge, and that particular stretch of the motorway might see many fatal car crashes. The tree was saved. The motorway rerouted. And can anyone remember the DeLorean car made famous by Back to the Future? Well, when they built the factory in Belfast, they removed a large blackthorn fairy tree. I don't know if any one individual died, but the business certainly did. But why is it so deeply connected with fairy lore? Well, the simple answer is the tree's ability to grow alone, miles from any other parent tree, out of hard, impenetrable rocks. Long-forgotten ring forts, ruined Celtic settlements hide under mounds of earth, and local folklore has always said that these mounds belong to the fairies, and blackthorns just love a pile of stones to grow from. So maybe that's it. They belong in the forest, but insist upon themselves being in the middle of fields. Maybe it's because of the great catstone on the hill of Usnach, which is surrounded by them. This is the place where the Tuatha Dé Danann, or the mythical and magical people who once ruled Ireland and made agreement with the sons of Mill, the first of the Celts to come to Ireland. They agreed to split the land between them, the mortals taking the land in exchange that the Celts would worship them as the gods, and the Tuatha Dé Danann then created a new underworld for themselves, later to be known as the Land of the Sidhe. Even if this isn't the case, later on in time, this hardy tree, so good for keeping in cattle and acting in the forest as a safe haven for small mammals, soon found itself becoming associated with a new type of fairy, the leprechaun. High in the Wicklow Hills between the villages of Shillelagh and Healy, you'll find a small but ancient woodlands, Tomnafinogue Woods. Here, oaks, hazel and blackthorn all grow in abundance. Once, this woodland stretched across the Wicklow Mountains, down onto the coastline, all the way down to Arklow, across the county of Wexford, and down onto the Hook Peninsula. It was known as An Dubh Tíre, the Dark Country, and it was home to a tribe who ruled the woods since the Bronze Age. Named for their first leader, Éileach, as the trees were cut down, their territory grew smaller and smaller. And by the time Henry II and his Norman knights arrived in the early 1200s, the forest was smaller still. As the forest became smaller and smaller, the tribe isolated themselves from others. They developed their own style of fighting called bataracht, a stick fighting using the blackthorn. Still popular with Irish Americans, it doesn't exist in Ireland anymore, as all the great bataracht fighters were headhunted to protect the railway builders of America in the mid-1800s, and they took every single bataracht fighter from the country. Now, the blackthorn makes a great weapon. It's strong, yet very, very light wood, and it's knobbly, the knots in the tree making the perfect cudgel or handle. And they also invented a tree language using the blackthorn, which involved hanging blackthorn branches on other trees. Long lost to us now, but a branch hanging this way could mean we passed through here earlier and we'll be coming back before nightfall. Or hung this way, it could mean good deer in this forest. Or hung another way could mean there's soldiers camping near here, beware. People living on the outskirts of the woods in the 14th, 15th and 16th centuries knew that these strange people were good with their hands, great at fixing pots and boots and the like. And so they would keep a bit of blackthorn, and at times they would leave out some shoes to be repaired, a parcel of food left beside it as payment, and the branch hanging above as a signifier to the remains of this great Éileach tribe, that this was a job for them to do, and here was their payment. Don't leave them money, though. Any coins left would just go into a pot, which would be hidden under the trees. They had no use for it. And as the years went by and their woodland home grew small, the tribe did too. Intermarrying led to genetic deformations and stunted heights. They became more afraid of being seen by public. Their habit of dressing in earthy camouflage colours and carrying their weapon, the Blackthorne, gave them an unworldly air, and eventually they too entered the mists of time, earning the name leprechaun, which comes from the Latin. It means little body, and the status of the she. Now let's follow the path of the Aelach tribe and go further again into the forest. There are many more of the Fach Fado to explore, like the spindle, the white bean, the aspen and juniper, but we've little time. And so we'll move to the Athig Fado, or the commoners of the woods. These trees are for all to use, but again within reason and balance. The fine might only be a single old cow, but if she's your meat for the winter, well, you could be in trouble. The commoners of the woods include the willow, the hawthorn, the rowan with its bright red berries so often seen in modern housing estates, the proud elm that inspired George R. Martin's weirwood trees, and the humble cherry tree. But for now, let's look at my favourite, the alder, and here it is in front of you, the warrior's tree. The bark is dark in colour, deeply fissured. You'll often find it hard to find any bark because it's so covered in lichen or moss. The deep green leaves are almost round with no tip. Instead, the tip is slightly inverted, and so it almost looks like a heart shape. The alder tree, or ferna in Irish, was held very dear to Celtic warriors. Firstly, when cut into, the sap oxidizes. It turns a deep red colour, not unsimilar to blood, but it's also lightweight and extremely strong, making the strongest shields. When the Celts went to war against Vikings, they held these shields up, and the Vikings, their weapon of choice, tended to be an axe. So at the end of the battle, a good warrior might find himself the new owner of 5 or 6 new axes, wedged into the thick alder shield. Was it the blood-coloured sap or the protection that endeared it to the warriors? Who knows? It's a strange wood. It's completely resistant to water, will not rot. And so many of the crannogs, or the artificial islands built by our ancestors here in Ireland, were built on alder posts. And we weren't alone. The city of Venice is also built on alder. And it was for this reason that it was used for water pipes, water storage, small boats, and on the great and royal canals that cross Ireland and enter the Liffey in Dublin. You'll find the sluice gates, now 200 years old and going strong, are made from alder. Alder was also farmed extensively to make charcoal. Why did we need so much charcoal? Well, for gunpowder, of course. As the centuries passed, it was still very much the tree of the warrior, and it's still being wielded like an axe these days on stage, though, by guitarists, for the fender is made out of alder. Ferns, a village in County Wexford, is called after the alder, Ferna. This small village today is relatively unremarkable, but for the ruined Ferns Castle on the hill and Europe's smallest cathedral sitting at the base. But long before Dublin, this little village was the capital of Leinster, a formidable base filled with the best warriors the region had. Was it the alder woodlands that made it so attractive a base? Now, as we are in the centre of the woods, our final tree to visit is the birch. And though this is the last tree we will explore, it is actually a tree of firsts. Way back at the start of our virtual walk, I talked about the ice sheets that once covered Ireland. Well, the first trees to appear on Ireland's ancient landscape were the birch. It's similar to the modern silver birch. She too has a pale white bark, but the silver birch, the modern one, will lose her silvery bark by the age of 25. The downy birch, well, hers stays white as she ages. You'll often see the downy birch, on the great country houses on their drives. She grows incredibly tall, with delicate triangular shaped leaves, and when the wind blows, her boughs dance like a beautiful woman of an old movie. If you're not sure if she's a modern silver birch or an old downy birch, find a twig. If it has a soft downy fuzz, you found a downy birch. As the ice caps receded and the grasses came first, followed by furze, bracken, broom and prickly gorse, they attracted birds and pollinators. who brought the birch. The enchanted lady of the forest, as she's known in mythology. She is indeed a tree of firsts. I have mentioned Samhain as the start of the dark half of the year. Samhain was the Celtic New Year. It made sense. The Celts believed the new day started as the sun set. Everything begins in the dark. The child in its mother's belly, a seed deep down under the ground. And Samhain. The year starts when everything is quiet and dark. At Samhain, birch boughs were cut down to sweep away any negativity or illness that may have accumulated around the home during the previous year. Witches' brooms were just brooms back centuries ago, and always made with birch. The flying part may have had more to do with the fact that mushroom fly agaric grows on rotting birch. But the idea that birch can sweep away evil lasted right up until the 1800s. Birching, as it was known, meant whipping a prisoner, or, unfortunately, a child, with a birch rod. It was hoped that any evil within them would disappear. But back to happier thoughts of firsts. Birch wood is not strong like oak or alder. It is beautiful, though, and it was often used to make things like cots, spindles, bowls, plates. And birch sap, well, that was an extremely good thing to have, as it's incredibly sticky and hardens as like iron, making it a practical glue. And apparently our ancestors back in the Iron Age enjoyed it as a cordial. Plus, bark is a fantastic fire starter, especially handy if you're travelling long distances through forests filled with wolves. And should you be looking to write something down, well, while our monk friends may have preferred vellum, they practiced their ABCs on strips of birch bark. And speaking of ABCs, I think this is my favourite connection we have to our trees. It's our native alphabet, Ogham. It is said that the mythical Tuatha warrior Lu was the first to receive a written warning on a scrap of birch, telling him that his wife and great love was in danger. It was written in the Ogham alphabet, which was devised by Og, the Celtic god of writing. It's a strange alphabet and tricky to explain, so bear with me. Each symbol is a sound, a letter, and a colour. Each sound is also the name of a tree or some part of the forest. So ABC is Beth Lus Nin, or birch, brush, forked trunk, roughly speaking. It's also BLN. It is most commonly found on ancient stone monuments, like standing stones, boundary markers, and occasionally graves, but it seems to have been a remarkably sophisticated series of symbols. As I mentioned, each had a colour too, the dye produced by each tree. For example, elderberries give you a purple, oak will give you black, birch will give you a pale green. There is an argument too that the sounds have a spiritual resonance too. Even the word Om sounds remarkably similar to the old chant Om. The Christian monks who laboured day in and day out, recording the fading world of the pagans, through the books like the Laur Gabal and the Annals of the Four Masters, may have written using Latin alphabet, but they used Om to write notes to each other and notes in the margins. One Latin textbook has hungover scrawled in Om in a bottom corner of a page. God love him, whoever he was. It's read in the same way you would climb a tree. One large trunk, with each letter branching off to the left or the right or through the centre, and you read it from the first branch up. Now, over the centuries, many more trees have arrived on our shores. Not native, but becoming naturalised. There's the beech. She's not from Ireland, but she's now home to over 60 insects. There's the chestnut, brought here from Turkey. And the sycamore, all common trees, but only in the last few centuries. Brought here by grants to plant trees in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. And it is one of this country's greatest tragedies, and God, don't we have many, that our native forests are almost all gone. Only 0.01% is all that actually remains. This from a land that once held trees in such high status that they influenced the names they gave their territories. It inspired their writing and actual alphabet. That certain trees were given the same status as chieftains or druids. And individual trees were held in the same respectful way that we see certain buildings today. Yew trees, ancient yews, a group or a grove of them held a similar reverence to the great cathedrals we visit today. Elm for small bows, and alder forests for spears as the suppliers of arms. And don't forget the forest floors, the herb layer. Well, in the past they were seen as fuel stocks, foraging corridors, and pharmacies. Today, trees are chosen for their aesthetic reasons by city planners, not necessarily considering what the land might need. Others, like willow and whitebeam, are spoken about like weeds, landowners and gardeners describing them as untidy, invasive, or useless, when you would once been subjected to a fine for depriving the animals, birds, and insects of this vital habitat. Perhaps the landowner should question really who is the untidy, invasive, and useless one. As people who are surrounded with trees live longer, they suffer from less stress-related diseases. Children who have views of trees in their classrooms absorb more information, and patients in hospitals with a view of trees spend on average 8 days less in bed than patients without a view of trees. Neighbourhoods with more trees, well, they see less crime. And because of the oxygenation process and the natural shade, areas near woodlands and cities with lots of parks filled with trees are typically 1 to 2 degrees cooler. Walking under trees lowers blood pressure, slows down the production of cortisol, the stress hormone, and trees provide food and shelter for an unbelievable amount of insects, birds, and animals. So do me a favour. This winter, let the leaves gather under the trees in your garden. It's there for the bugs and the worms and the centipedes, the winter diet of our birds. Honour the ancestors of this land by opening yourself up to exploring other trees we didn't have time to visit today. Trees have been part of the Irish culture since Khazar arrived on these shores of Finton 5,000 years ago. He may have outlived a yew, but just if we don't start seeing trees with the same integral respect as our ancestors did, well, we won't live that long. And with that, our walk comes to an end. I truly hope some of the things you heard today will stay with you and shape the way you see the trees around your home and work. Encourage more of them to grow. Plant them secretly all over the place. Thank you for listening. Slán.